Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Who Do We Have on Headsets? Today's topic, SM teams, United States versus international. I'm going to get started today with basic definitions of our U.S. team members. I pulled these definitions from a wonderful interview by Ira Mont, who's a production stage manager currently on Jagged Little Pill. And if you don't know Ira, he's pretty amazing. Um, Ira defines a production stage manager, or a PSM, as the boss of the stage management team. The PSM coordinates the artistic side of the show. It's their job to carry out the director and producer's wishes and help them maintain the show's artistic integrity. Production stage managers schedule rehearsals. They keep track of all of the technical cues and the blocking, which is the movement of actors, of course, during the show. And they coordinate the actors and the technical aspects during the show. Production stage managers also keep records such as attendance and hours worked for shows, particularly on an equity show. Sometimes during the show's run, the production stage manager cannot call the show because they are taking notes for the actors and the director. So they are sometimes call the show, sometimes they do not. That can rotate here in the United States. Also, a production stage manager is responsible for running rehearsals for understudies and cast replacements without the original director present, so they become, in essence, the de facto director once the show opens. Other stage managers at that point may also step in and read lines in rehearsal. Equity defines two roles, stage manager and assistant stage manager. So production stage manager is a term that has been created on contracts to designate whoever is the lead stage manager on the team. If you have a production stage manager, then the next stage manager on the team is referred to as a stage manager, or sometimes the first assistant stage manager. Their job is to help or assist the production stage manager with stage management duties. They may be assigned things such as tracking props or costumes. They may be on book. They may take line notes. Then our assistant stage manager may also be referred to as a second assistant stage manager or a deck stage manager, because usually they are backstage and run the backstage area or the deck during the run of the show. In addition to production stage manager, assistant stage manager, there are two other types of people you will hear that are associated with a stage management team. One may be the rehearsal stage manager. That is someone who comes in and performs the duties of the production stage manager or the stage manager in the rehearsal only. Then the production stage manager comes in and calls the show. That person may sometimes later be called, because they're familiar with the show, to become a substitute or replacement stage manager, which I believe Ingrid is going to talk about a little bit more later. The last person you'll hear about on a stage management team in the US is a production assistant, or a PA. They are not on an equity contract due to safety reasons. Production assistants usually assist the stage management team in any duties that are needed. General errands, running copies, distributing scripts, or script changes, for example. And they also can, at some points, work their way up into the stage management team, perhaps as a substitute stage manager or a replacement stage manager. So those are the basic terms that we use in the United States. And those teams can be small or larger, depending on whether it's a play or a musical. Also, depending on what level you are, regional theater, off-Broadway, or Broadway contracts. So Lizzie's going to talk a little bit more now about some stage management team specifics.
Thanks, Lisa. So what I'm going to specifically talk about is how rotation works on Broadway and some off-Broadway and regional contracts. For the stage management team, generally up until previews are underway, the PSM is the calling stage manager, through tech and learning the show and the cues. Then the first ASM and the second ASM, one is running the deck, or both are running the deck, depending on how big the show is, stage left or right. Maybe one is in the basement, if there's a basement, and one is in the office taking notes throughout the show. And then, kind of like baseball, once previews are underway and the show sometimes freezes, because as we know, sometimes shows don't freeze, that they rotate who calls and runs the deck with their deck cards. Everyone learns the show like the back of their hand, their safety and confidence in what they're doing. And so whoever calls it on Tuesday isn't going to necessarily call it Wednesday, but sometimes they might. On a 2-show day, that it might be the same calling stage manager. It might be on Wednesday. They generally don't try to, just vocal rest and keeping everything tight and seamless. So it depends on the show. That's how it works primarily on Broadway and off Broadway. In Europe, however, and I think in South Africa, they call fewer cues when they call the show. So sometimes what they call a deputy stage manager is their calling stage manager throughout the entire run and production. Something that's also different about international versus here is because of equity contracts, stage managers can't touch the props on a Broadway show, not part of the union. If they do quickly at rehearsal, which I've seen they have to ask, even if it's just slightly moving a chair downstage or respiking it. And also in the UK, they don't always take breaks. Here we are very particular, especially on equity contracts, about taking our 5-minute breaks if we've worked 55 minutes or 10-minute breaks if we've worked 80 minutes. I worked with a British director, and they love, I think most people know in England, they love tea, and they always have a midday tea break. So we built our tea breaks into one of our 10-minute breaks towards the end of rehearsal, which was also, it was very sweet and cute, and it also helped keep the pace and balance of that process and the positivity. But yeah, it's very different here than internationally. I've never worked internationally personally, but if I ever do, it'll certainly be an adjustment, a good adjustment, but a different lifestyle. And there's also other little things, like I worked with a British director who his partner was also the playwright on the show, an American, and he'd have to translate a couple things for me. Like he asked for bulldog clips one day and I didn't know what that was, and he goes, he means binder clips. So there are little things like that, nothing that cause problems, which you're learning and picking up new things, or the way they write time was slightly different, but stuff that we could easily figure out and didn't disrupt the process. But I'm going to pass it on to Ingrid, who's going to talk about sub-stage managing.
So sub-stage managing, and also going to talk a little bit about the stage management structure in rep productions and companies, because it's slightly different in who does what for a particular company. Sub-stage managers, as Lisa mentioned, are stage managers who come in to help to sub into a particular track for a show when it's in performances. This helps and enables the process of like the first ASM learning how to call the show. Well, if that ASM has a track, someone's going to do that track. So typically the sub, which might be a PA, will learn the track, so then the first can learn how to call the show. Subs are also used to give stage managers vacations, because Broadway shows run a long time and you need some time off, or most do. Or if someone gets sick, especially coming up in this current time, you're going to need more coverage for sickness and illness and taking care of yourself or your family. So that's where subs come along. They learn specific tracks, like deck, if it has to be stage left, stage right, basement. I know with Spider-Man Turn After Dark, they ran with 7 different stage managers, I think, including 2 calling stage managers. So it'd be very specific who learned what. Again, depends on the size of the show. There are times when, of course, you have replacement stage managers. I personally have replaced on a show I was already working on. I was the only ASM in a show. We had the PSM, myself as the ASM, and we had a production assistant in rehearsal, because this was a regional contract. We were actually fortunate to have an equity ASM on the contract because it wasn't required, but it was great. The PSM had to leave 2 weeks early because she got another contract that was going to run longer and pay a little bit more. So in that case, the company had the choice to bring someone else in to replace the PSM outright, or something, the option they ended up choosing, which the PSM advocated for, was me as the ASM learning how to call the show and becoming the PSM for the last 2 weeks. And in that situation, we actually had Taylor, who is on our run crew for the show, running props and taking care of the props, and as someone who has an equity card, became the replacement ASM, and our PA took over Taylor's original track. So that also involved time of learning how to do each track. Luckily for us, as in most places, the PA was not involved with the run of the show, so we did have that extra body. With rep contracts, particularly in America, is how I'm talking about, it's a little different, especially with the scheduling aspect of who does what. So in my experience with the 2 theaters that I've worked with and other contracts, there would be a resident PSM, sometimes also known as the production stage manager. That person is there either for the entire season or for multiple years, and they are involved with, if it's a large company, scheduling for the entire company. In my experience with the rep contracts over the summer, instead of every lead stage manager per show, the PSM would send a daily call to the entire company and deal with that. That way we're not having multiple things. All the scheduling goes through one person and it's organized. With that setup, there was specifically the most recent one, we had 6 productions that were happening that season and were in rehearsal actually pretty much at the same time at various times. It's a pretty big example of Tetris of time. Each stage manager only worked on 3, and we had a stage management team of 4. So you had one person who was the calling stage manager for 3 of the shows, and the rest of us were a calling stage manager for 1 show each, and alternated in the deck tracks being either the first, or in the case of our non-union SM and our PA, they would be the second assistant stage manager, even though one of them's title was PA or intern. So beyond that, each calling stage manager or primary stage manager with primary responsibility for its show would be responsible for reports and for running tech. Obviously, with the intern stage manager and even non-union stage manager, myself as the equity ASM and then our equity PSM were there to help guide them through tech, supervise through the process, and help them with production meetings. We weren't necessarily required to be at a production meeting if it wasn't our show or being discussed, but sometimes we'd be there to help out and PSM to oversee. So that's the slight bit of difference. They're different things. You're wearing different hats all at the same time, but it isn't just one. You don't have to do one thing if you are not the resident stage manager. So that's a tiny bit of difference. I'm going to throw it over to Taylor to talk about European stage management.
Yep. And I'm actually just going to pretty much read verbatim what was sent to me by my friend Felix Dunning. I worked with him last summer on a show that was brought over from England and was done in off-Broadway. So I was the American counterpart to him. So their ASM, their assistant stage manager, will set the props and push the actors on stage if needed, pass props off, and are in the wings during the show. In rehearsal, they take care of all the props and resetting, and would be on hand to get an actor if they need that to get to their call. They would be doing the prop maintenance on the show, and the ASM is traditionally responsible for buying the props for the show, oftentimes with the stage manager. And that's their norm for smaller shows. Bigger shows, that's designated to their prop designer. Their DSM, which is a deputy stage manager, and deputy means something very different for us in the US, but they have a deputy stage manager, and that's the director's go-to person. And it varies. Their job varies between rehearsals and show. So for rehearsals, they'd be the one taking down the blocking and all the movements and such. And they would be doing the prompts when actors are off book. So giving lines when for actors are first off book. They write down the rehearsal notes, and that's what gets sent out to everybody, all the designers and the directors and producers and whatnot. And they make the plans for the next day. During the show, or in tech, they'll run the light cues for plays and sound cues as well, and they'll also cue the flying and set changes as well, and they'll write the show report for the end of the day. Their company stage manager is usually a two-role person, but will kind of be combined into one, except on the big shows, the bigger musicals. The company manager part of their job is to oversee everything, actors and stage management alike. They will be the liaisons between producers and the PR, the rep companies. They manage the timesheets and the payroll to submit for finances. And in person, in the rehearsal room, they're the ones who make sure that the actors and stage managers' biographies get approved and wind up appropriately in the program. They will, as he said, looks after the star turns requirements. So that's special. And they keep the team happy, and they will arrange extracurricular activities when they're on the road for touring and such. And they keep the company in high spirits and everything. As the stage manager, they will assist the DSM, which again is the deputy DSM, in rehearsals, and they run the stage management team. They lead the tech rehearsals from on stage as opposed to out in the house with the designers and such. And they may have some stage cues during the show. On tour, they will help build the set. They work as the master carpenter, and so they help build and take down, and they oversee the load-ins and load-outs, and the whole show. They oversee the whole show along with the deputy stage manager. So for them, it seems it's a lot of what we do as well, just broken up into different jobs. So it seems, to me that we tend to take on more of those roles in the PSM or ASM categories for us, because we do a lot of that same stuff too. If you're on tour, your stage manager is the one who's going to oversee where things go. They're not necessarily putting it all together physically, but they're the ones who are going to tell you, well, that upstage wall goes on these are your marks. And then again, as an assistant stage manager, you're usually dealing with the props, provided that you're allowed to. Again, a Broadway contract, it's different. I'm not talking about that specifically, but regional and more close to home type contracts, smaller contracts, you're allowed to touch the props as a stage manager. And so you will be either doing maybe a quick fix or something like that. I, as an ASM though, barring a showcase code, have not bought the props. I've not been responsible for acquiring them or maintaining them throughout the entire run. Again, if it's a quick thing that needs to happen, it broke right before it was supposed to go on stage, I'll slap a Band-Aid on it, sometimes literally, just to get it through that scene. But yeah, that's what the similarities and differences. I think there's a lot of similarities. Again, it's just they have a different title for it, and they have a more specific person that takes care of it. And for us, it always depends on the needs of the show itself, how many people you have on your team, and what the contract requires. Also, you may have a stage manager stage right, and you may have someone stage left, or you may have just one person back there, and you may have multiple. Like we said, Spider-Man had 7 stage managers. Sorry, were you gonna say something, Lizzie?
No, I can say it when you're finished.
Okay, no, that's, yeah. And for that show, it was, everybody had a very specific track, as we call them. Their show was very specific to what they did, so much so that they learned if their cadence was off, that something maybe not quite right in whatever job they were doing in that moment. But yeah, that's the basic ebb and flow of their structure. For me, though, what I've done, like Ingrid was saying, there's the rehearsal stage manager and a replacement stage manager. I've sort of done both. I was rehearsal stage manager for a couple of shows where the PSM would come in and actually call the show, and then I wound up on deck during the show, because that was under a festival type of situation where they just wanted the person who had been in rehearsal to be with the actors backstage, because they knew them, and it made the actors a bit more comfortable, which is nice. And then I've had to take over, again, I got bumped up when Ingrid got bumped up on the show that she was talking about, but also I was doing a show where in rehearsal our PSM had a family emergency that she knew was coming up, and she was going to have to leave. So she bowed out gracefully, and they bumped me up and then hired somebody else to replace me. So I wound up calling that show, and somebody else was on deck for that. But yeah, that's pretty much, I think, my little thing. Lizzie, what were you gonna mention?
Something just about Spider-Man, because Ingrid mentioned they had 2 calling stage managers on Broadway Spider-Man. They had 2 calling stage managers for that specific production, which doesn't happen on most Broadway productions or any production, because they needed one stage manager to call the light and the sound cues, and I guess if they had projection, and they needed one stage manager to call the automation, the auto deck and auto fly, and that was for safety. When they the first Spider-Man, because there were 2 different productions of Broadway Spider-Man actually, because of how specific that concept was, that story was, that production, for the safety and the execution of that show, they had to have, just because there were so many cues, they had to have 2 different people to safely execute that. I'm also curious, and I could ask someone that worked on it, if that, because like I said, it rotates on the calling stage manager and the deck stage managers on most productions, if that did on that, or if it was the same calling stage managers for those productions, just because of the specificity of that production.
I do remember them saying they had people come in for them because there were vacations taken during.
Okay, so it did rotate.
Yeah, I think it's, what is it, them, and also they're pretty rigorous. You're not going to get just a one show shadow per se, and you're going to be shadowing for quite a bit, and then shadowed for quite a bit before you actually get to take your show. You get to do it
okay.
Oh yeah, because that show ran, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, I believe ran over 1,000 performances probably between all of its incarnations,
Mhm.
because
I
one
think
of the
so.
few shows to actually go back into tech. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then also at the symposium, at least year two, I remember many people at the panels were like sub replacements in that process when they were talking about it too.
But I just couldn't remember if they talked about if they were deck sub replacements or like calling.
Oh, I can't imagine like one person, the two people calling for 1,000 performances. That's
A
almost
lot.
That's almost 3 years.
It
Yeah.
is. It's a lot. I just because of the nature of that
Yeah.
compared to all the other different productions, that it was so specific that like we actually listened, I think, to Kat
Yeah.
a recording of one of the symposiums, and it was like military.
Yeah.
So like it was the most focused calling not that other productions aren't focused, obviously they are, but it was so focused because of, I mean, if you know Spider-Man, you know there were a lot of accidents and injuries. It's not a secret that show had, which is why there were two Spider-Mans. That showed a lot of unfortunate series of events, which is why it was so specific in military style how they called everything.
Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of headset banter on that show.
Yes.
No time for
No.
that.
Which I know that that's also a preference to stage managers, that they mind headset banter or not.
Depends on the show, but not Spider-Man.
No, not Spider-Man. And that's like I was saying, it you know, the show itself dictates what is needed, and sometimes you have to fight for additions to your team. You may have to get to a certain point. I have no problem saying, or if a director asks me if I can do something, specifically as an ASM on deck, when things are trying to play the well, I can't fit a 3-foot thing in a 2-foot space game. My answer usually, if a director asks if something can be accomplished, is let's try it. And if you can't, at least you've tried, and they can actually then see how it works or doesn't work, and they can make a decision for themselves. That being said, and the people who are doing the hiring of your team may need to see that too. Well, if you want to watch backstage, because I've had producers watch me backstage and they marvel at what it is that's happening back there. They have no idea what the show behind the show is. Because they're in the office. They're the ones trying to make those budgetary decisions and stuff like that. They're not trying to make the decisions backstage, of safety and where things go and when things go. But if you have somebody watching you backstage, if they need to be somewhere back there out of your way saying, this is why what we're doing does not work and we need another person, maybe invite them to do that, because at least it gives them a little bit of an understanding of what you do. A lot of my experience is more backstage than it is calling a show, just because that's a preference that I have. And I'm pretty upfront with that too, when given the option between calling a show and being on deck. I will usually say I prefer to be on deck, because I think it helps to know your strengths, and I'm strong backstage. So
I'm the opposite. I prefer to call. I mean, I'm happy to do the deck, but I am primarily a calling stage manager.
yeah, and my answer usually in an interview will be, I can call a show. I will call a show if that's what it comes down to. But my preference is, if you're asking me flat out, my preference is to be backstage.
And my preference is I don't care, but I have been a calling stage manager most of my career, so I fell into that.
I can probably count for the amount of deck stage managing I've done. I've called so many shows, which I love. I love calling a show. It's really fun. I mean, I like running the deck too, but I really do enjoy it, like calling all the cues. It's fun, and part of the reason we like doing stage management.
It's also fun to have your calling stage manager who has a moment off for the day come backstage with you and watch that part of the show too, because it's a new show to them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I know what show you're talking about.
Yeah. it was cool. It's a little nerve-wracking for the person that they're watching sometimes, but it's fun.
Well, that's also kind of reputation of the person too.
Also, something I wanted to add, and I forgot when I was talking earlier, especially on Broadway contracts, production assistants are not a part of the stage management team. What I mean is under contract. And we're going to actually get into more of that next week. But it's for their safety currently. Again, we're going to talk more about that next week. They are not under contract as a stage manager if something happens as part of the union. I mean, philosophically, they're part of the team. They're working with the team. Their name is on the stage management office. Everyone knows they're with the stage management team. But for their safety, or if you're a production assistant on a Broadway production or a touring company, a touring production, for your safety, right now it's good that you're not a part of the stage management team under that contract, and that you're on a specific other contract.
It's not only their safety, and we're not really even talking about physical safety per se.
No, I'm not talking about physical safety.
Yeah, it's the safety of the producers as well,
Yes.
and backers.
Yes.
Being said, though, PAs work just as hard as anybody else, if
Yes.
not more so sometimes. Like, because I've not met a PA where I've had to throw something at them real quick and they've said no, or at least not tried to do it. So
I have once, but that person was never hired ever again.
yeah, well, that's how you also know who to weed out.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, PA, that I did a project with, and they were very testy. They were not asked back.
And part of our job in general as stage managers and production assistants is to know our places, not actual physical places, top or anything like that. Yes, there's that.
Put up.
Talking about to know, like, there are some decisions that we're not supposed to make, and you can kind of direct whoever's asking the question to that person, but an unprompted, unwarranted opinion is not always the greatest idea. Again, if you're asked your opinion, then give it. If you're flat out asked, that's one thing. But I think with trepidation, you should give your own input on certain things, especially when your director is not necessarily present in the room and an actor has a question about a scene or their lines or something. Have them gear it toward the director or the assistant director once they get there, because again, that's not your call. You're not the director. You're not the scenic designer. If there's something that's you can take the note and pass it along.
And to supplement that, if you're an equity stage manager, there are things that are not our responsibility by contract. You may be asked to do those, such as running a light board, for example, but equity contracts specifically say that's not part of your job, and you are supposed to be able to negotiate extra pay for that, which is something we'll talk about topic-wise later down the road. But that is something that also is important to know, what you are responsible for and what you are not responsible for.
It's interesting with that there's actually kind of two categories with duties with equity. In the not part of your domain type thing, there's the you can do them, you really shouldn't, but you can if negotiated. And then there's the flat out, you don't do that, which most of them do sometimes fall under the realm of legality, like even delivering paychecks, technically not supposed to do that. Sign the closing notice, definitely not supposed to do that.
And that caught my attention because when Taylor was talking about the UK, one of the things that was on that was that they dealt with payroll, and we cannot do that.
No.
I mean,
we're not supposed to.
We're not supposed to.
I'd say there's a fine line with like tracking overtime.
Yes, because
But processing payroll, no. So there's
We're not,
that's more like production manager, go.
you know, we're not supposed to be the ones handing out people's physical paychecks. I don't want that on my shoulders in case something happens.
I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever had a stage manager hand me a check though. I think it's usually the company manager comes.
Yeah, usually
I've
Usually, yeah.
um
Or if it's a producer, they
producer.
know.
Yeah.
I've been asked to by the producer before, and I said no because that's.
I've never been asked.
They have asked me before, can I leave, like, you know, can I leave these here? And I will say sure, but I'm not responsible for them. You can.
I have been asked to pay on like 1-day projects. The producer will, as a production manager, production coordinator, so it wasn't stage managing, hand out the cash for the day if it was like, you know, just a 1-day thing and you're passing out the cash for the day. But I haven't never been asked as a stage manager to do that, surprisingly.
Yeah, there's definitely always gray area with that, especially like being, I mean, production manager, resident stage manager, which because it's not an actual category in equity, you got another line there. Like, where are you? Are you more admin, which is possible, or purely equity? And also TYA touring, like with TheaterWorks USA, stage manager is the only non-performing person that's out on the road. So stage manager holds the cards, like the pay cards for paying for hotel, paying for things you need like laundry supplies, doing laundry, which ends up being a rider thing to people in the company. We're also like, we get the mail sent to us, and that includes the pay stubs. Like, not your paycheck, it has to be direct deposit, but we have the pay stubs. So there's a lot that goes on there, like, and we're maintaining the vehicles, like making sure they get service, maintaining the physical nature of it, or supervising the actor ASMs to do it. So that's one part where it's a little different, but then again, far from production contract, one of the lowest forms of touring. Yeah, it's interesting how that goes, even in an equity contract.
Touring is a beast in and of itself.
And there's different types. Like, you got the full production, CETA, bus and truck, TYA, some that don't even have a stage manager, but generally those are not the union contracts.
Wait, tours that don't have a stage manager?
Bright Star.
Oh, interesting.
Tours
Two
that
people,
start out as equity and then go non.
those typically, though, have stage managers. Bright Star is another form of TYA.
Yeah, those are. I did a. Well, I guess it was a 2-stop tour, bus and truck. So I have it. It's the only one that I've done, and I can technically put it on my resume. So
I technically toured in college around Rhode Island. That's kind of it, though. Technically.
second stop was Atlantic City.
Fun.
It was
Gamble away those paychecks.
yeah.
Pretty much every state east of the Mississippi. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And Canada.
Mhm.
International touring now.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's international. I mean, same continent, but it's international.
We were in charge, like, going through customs. Yep, stage manager was in charge of that.
Mhm.
That's process.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Ingrid, you really, in essence, were taking on company manager and production manager duties as well.
In general management.
In general, yeah.
Essentially, yes, like on the road, yes. Obviously, we had our production manager in the office who supervises all the tours that go out, since that company has anywhere from 6 to 10, depending on what time of the year it is. And of course, we have the company manager and the assistant or associate company manager who was on call to us, because you have to, part of the protection with that is we have to have a producer's representative either with us or available to us by phone 24/7. So we could call primarily the company manager, especially my first 2 tours with them. Third one, the associate company manager changed. But our company manager, 24/7, we'd call our associate company manager for the first 2 if it was like a hotel related one, because he was the one who dealt with hotels. But yeah, like I should have put the company management on speed dial. And also the production manager for a while didn't have a cell phone.
And what year was this?
Yeah, that's bizarre.
2016. I don't know when he got the cell phone. Maybe he got it by the time I did my last tour with them in 2017. I can't remember, but he definitely had it by early 2019 because I would do side work with them. It's like, oh, you now have a cell phone. Cool.
In 2016? Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't the emergency contact. We would normally get our production manager by email or the office phone, which he was pretty responsive to. But the biggest was our company manager. And I mean, I also had the equity rep on, favorited on my phone too.
I mean, I feel like that out of all the jobs, I mean, there's a lot of jobs in this world you don't need a cell phone for. But I feel like company management, that's one you should probably have.
Well,
Not necessarily a smartphone, but like a cell phone.
and sort of the difference between again the UK and us is that their company stage manager is the company manager always, whereas for us the company manager may be a stage manager in their life, but they're not part of the stage management team. Sometimes you have places that don't have company managers or a general manager
or production managers.
And that's fun.
Yeah, showcases are.
Just go right to the producer, pretty much.
I mean,
I kind of wanted to circle back on was that they have what I called a deputy stage manager before, and for us, a deputy is something very different. A stage manager can be our deputy over here. I've not worked that way before, where it's always been an actor for me who was the deputy, which I prefer because then that's somebody else that I can go to talk to about an issue or something that's happening, just in case. I think it's helpful to have it be an actor. Because then I think also the actors feel like they have a bit of more of an advocate for them as well. And so does I, again, as a stage manager, I do too.
Yeah.
So.
And that role of the deputy is changing. Equity has expanded that role now. So the deputy really has a little bit more responsibility, which is helpful. And their job is to help the stage management team as well as everyone else coordinate and be a go-between the liaison with equity and following contract, etc. So yeah, it is very different.
Yeah.
I know the only instances where a stage manager, even the calling stage manager, assistant stage manager might happen a bit more often would be if it's like a one-person show.
Yeah.
And the actor didn't want to do it.
Yeah, that's very different. Yeah, it's very different.
But yeah, for those that don't know, the deputy is just another liaison between the stage managers and actors and equity, and the producers.
Technically, again, this is all changing and something we can talk about, but some say that the deputy does not and should not be in conversation with the producer beyond their point of being a member of the company. But
one of the many hot button topics in equity.
There are contradictions even in the contracts.
Yes, there are.
That's next week's episode.
Yeah.
I'm getting a storm here.
Yeah, it's starting to get kind of windy.
Send it your way.
pretty dark right now.
Well, it went through New Jersey and I guess passed over the Bronx, and now
It
it's back
did.
on Long Island.
Yeah.
There's the geography of your hosts.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, there's and I think you know, part of the stage management team's job is to kind of the UK has it as their, I think it was their deputy stage manager. I should go back and look because my notes are still here. You know, just keeping up morale was one of the notes that I was given, which I think that just kind of, I don't really think that's one specific person's job.
That's the stage management team.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
management team. Is when you're in rehearsal, it's the director also, because they tend to be the more the first person you get and or criticisms from.
And I would include PAs in keeping up the morale.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be, I think, a broad spectrum. Shared responsibility, especially depending on the show that you're doing. If you're doing a heavier show, that's rough. It's you got to try to figure out something to keep yourself sane and wanting to come back the next day to do it.
And in connection with morale, notice that Lizzie uses the term the stage management team. It's been a hot topic in social media for the last couple of weeks about the term assistant stage manager and whether we should continue to use the term assistant. And a lot of us, I know, as production stage managers, like to just say stage management team because we're all working just as hard. We may have different responsibilities, but we all do work as a team, and we all want to accomplish the same thing. That's the best show we can put on the stage. But that topic has come up on social media about getting rid of the term assistant.
I think it's, I mean, I don't mind the term assistant, but I think like I don't think it's as appropriate anymore just because like even for the symposium, you know, we're a big, I say team. Like when we were doing the hop-in, I said, you know, don't write production assistant, write production team, because it took all 14 of us to run that event. And whether someone had fewer responsibilities than me or the producer, it's a team effort. And yeah, I say PAs for your safety on a Broadway contract, you're not on a stage manager, but you're still part of the team. So I hope I was clear about that earlier. You're not under a stage management contract, but you are part of the team and keeping up morale and being there for and everyone in the company. So
the biggest difference, I would say, again, you have different responsibilities, you're doing different things, but you know, one of the big differences is your pay rate.
Yeah,
that's it. It's just what it is. On Spider-Man, everybody, yes, there were the two PSMs, and then everybody else was billed as ASM, but their head PSMs flat out said everybody was a PSM on that show. The difference was the pay rate, because it's, again, you just get paid differently depending on what it is that you're doing. But you're no more or less important than anybody else there. It takes every single person in that theater to put on the show. You need somebody to fill each role, to, you know, and you notice when or the actors and the crew will notice when something is off, because somebody's not there. It's a different dynamic if you have to move things around. It just is. So.
That being said, one of the reasons why I kind of don't prefer to be a PSM, a calling stage manager, like rotating, great. Split time between that and the deck, great. But the responsibility of the PSM, especially with communication outside the rehearsal hall, that is something that I know is not currently or hasn't been in my strength in the past, just because of the emotional toll of that, because it is an emotional toll. There's a reason why they're like running the show. Yes, everyone's equally important, but the outside work,
yeah, And that's part of it. Part of my reason too is that I know that when rehearsal's over, I get to go home.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily there, and that's not to say that that as an ASM you don't have to deal with outside stuff. You do sometimes because it just affects you as well. But it doesn't come down on you first, or even the most.
It's like being the voice of the team as the PSM or
Yeah.
the representative.
Yes.
Like I don't have to deal with a 3 a.m. phone call if I'm not supposed to, which
I think
I've definitely I PSM a lot because as the calling SM for a lot of off-Broadway productions, I tend to be the PSM. And yeah, getting those 3 a.m. phone calls and emails is draining, but it's also in my contract. I get paid for it. I mean, it doesn't happen every night, thankfully, maybe once a week, but especially on a world premiere, and I do a lot of world premieres and a lot of new works, it does happen.
yeah.
That's a topic for another time, like
It is.
whether those count as overtime because
Oh, I keep track of that stuff. No, they get a bill. And I tell them, you're making me do work.
Yeah. I know the big thing that always comes to my mind when it comes to the difference between a PSM and like an ASM. ASM is like, especially for production, your job is 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, versus a PSM, it's 24/7.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
So that kind of idea.
And then
It's
the difference between an ASM and a PA. Let's say I don't necessarily make a PA come to a production meeting if they can't get there. I think it's good for them, especially if they're still in school or they're new in the career, to stop by every once in a while just to see what one is like. But I don't think they necessarily need to be there for every single time. Sometimes, honestly, sometimes the fewer people that are outside of the core team for production meetings, the better, just so you can get through it and get it done. And if you've had a particularly rough day, maybe some things are be said that people shouldn't hear. Hopefully not, but it happens.
I would agree with that.
But yeah, but also that's another step for a PA is they get to go home even sooner than the ASM does in theory, provided that their responsibilities are done, obviously. And they can have a lot. They can have a lot of responsibilities. That's why I was saying before, they're no less responsible or they don't do less work. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, I also know some PSMs, and I don't do this personally, who will leave production assistants off reports because they think that's too much information for them to know. I will personally always make sure that they are on reports, etc., because they should know everything. I think it's detrimental if they don't. I mean, if you're worried that they might, I don't know if the right phrasing, but I'll say it, run their mouth about something, that's something you talk about pre-production, and again, a lot of times PAs are college students, are fresh out of school. So those conversations are important for the PSM and the team to talk about, so that you all know the structure of how this specific project is going to work and the people on it. I mean, we were talking about earlier before we started recording, PAs are not there to like set your coffee and this, that, and the other. They're there to help get the show safely on its feet. So please don't treat them like a coffee goofer or that they're below you because they're a production assistant or an intern. At the end of the day, it's just what's written on their contract. Like Taylor said, everyone is equally important in helping getting that project up.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a good place to end too. So I will.
To be continued to next week's topic.
Yeah.
Unions.
To be equity or not to be.
And how PAs fit into that.
And may fit in the future. Thanks, everybody. See you later.